Christine Dolan for joining us again, especially because it was a last minute due to the Bailey tragedy. So we originally had Bailey scheduled, and because of the tragedy, we ended up asking Christine. She truly is the voice for human trafficking. She has written a trilogy of books, and on your table we have, so that you can order the books, there's, and if you want to take this home at the end of the night, you're welcome to, because you can use the QR code to order the books. And we have one gentleman that was right here in the front. He actually ordered it from Amazon. And she was able to sign it. Unfortunately, the warehouse wasn't able to get them here for us. So please order the books. And just so you know as well that General Flynn, Laura Logan, Senator Ron Johnson, to name a few, have endorsed these books. So please join me in welcoming our dear friend, Christine Dolan.
Okay, this is kind of an ugly topic, but at least we have Christmas decorations in the room. The reason why you don't have these books here tonight is that there's a good story to this. Simon & Schuster has agreed to distribute these books. Historia publisher, my dear friend Kurt, has published this trilogy, and he has stood with me now for the last year and a half. He said to me, "You have a story to be told." I said, "Yes," and it is about evil in the world because our world is upside down. And just a little bit of my background. I started off in broadcasting at ABC News a zillion years ago, and then I was the political director in covering politics. I worked for the political director at ABC News, and then I became his counterpart in the 1980s at CNN. I was the first woman political director of any network here in the United States. I created some shows at CNN. We put CNN on the map in the 1980s through our election coverage. And also at the same time, I left the networks. I started my own production company, and I did a variety of different things. When the Today Show at NBC went to Africa because of my African background, I've spent a lot of times in Africa. I helped produce their segments in Africa. I was the spokesperson for the 1990 USA Nelson Mandela Tour that went around the country. And I also had an international policy show at PBS in the 1990s when people said you couldn't do an international policy show on PBS, and I said, yes, we can. And we had about 78% penetration of the PBS networks because we syndicated it ourselves. There was a thirst in those days for international news, but there was only very few times that you would find the networks covering the international news. Everything was a crisis. It wasn't about policy. And then in 2000, my life changed. I was commissioned by the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children in Washington, D.C. area, in Alexandria, where the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was created. If John Walsh, most of you are familiar with, he lost his son Adam, and because he became so morally outraged, the National Center was set up. In the late 1990s, I was at an embassy reception where they were announcing the International Center. And at that point, they were talking about if I were married to a sheikh in the Middle East and I'm an American woman, 3 times he can say I divorce you, and then he has the children, and there was no way that I could ever see my child again. So they set it up at The Hague so there would be a mechanism to have any kind of a conversation in a dispute settlement about what to do with somebody kidnapping children in a family situation. And I made the mistake of saying to the CEO that night, you should see what happens in war zones. In war zones, and I had covered 3 wars, in war zones people go missing. But we expect things to happen really crazy in war zones. We expect people to lose their minds. We expect people to do things that possibly they would not do. And then after that, Ernie Allen, who was the CEO, asked me if I would be interested in doing an investigation on the exploitation of children emanating from the Balkan crisis that I had covered in the early 90s. And I called 3 friends of mine, mentors, and I said to them, he's making this offer and I think it's great. Ed Turner, my former boss at CNN, said he has to have no say in the investigation. A friend of mine at the UN said, you're perfect for this. And Zig Nagorski, who was on his board, said, they should not have any say whatsoever. Do your magic, tell the truth, and make an impact. And Ernie was agreeable to those terms. He had no say in the investigation. He had no say editorially. And I was so horrified by what I saw on the ground, crisscrossing Europe in 2000, dressing up as a hooker, hanging out with transvestites in red light districts, because my gut told me that the reason why they were transvestites in red light districts was probably because they were victims of child abuse. And I went up to the boys at that point in time, in 2000, introduced myself, and my heartbeat was absolutely spot on. I took them to dinner, they took me shopping so I could have my costume to hang out in their section in the red light districts. And I got closer and closer to the story. I was also introduced to law enforcement. Everybody had said to me, you must talk to a man named Holmes. I didn't know it at the time, but Paul Holmes was the co-chair of the Interpol Human Trafficking Committee with a woman who's a Dutch cop named Yola Vollebrach. And they put me through a test to see if I was a tabloid journalist or if I really wanted to find out what the story and what this evil was all about. And I met with Paul. I asked him, and I put this in the first book, in Shattered Innocence, how young are the victims? And without a wink, he said infants. I had no context. I was not a rape victim. I didn't come from a family where people were sexually abused. I never covered this beat before, and it went in one ear, out the other. 2 weeks later, I was in Amsterdam, and I met with Yola, and I had no idea that she was connected to Paul as the co-chair of Interpol Trafficking Committee. And I told her and a man named Carlos Schippers, who was a forensic European profiler, about this conversation with Paul. And they said, Christine, it's all true. And I said, well, if it is, I think I'm well educated, I'm well seasoned. This is 25 years ago. So I had had a lot of experience doing investigations. I was known for doing investigations at the networks, not just covering politics. I said, you have to educate me because I'm telling you, people with my background have no idea, even if they've been in war zones. We expect to see horrible things, but what you're telling me is that this is among us. And with that, the next day, Yola called me, and she said, John Ernst wants to meet you. I said, who the hell is he? He was head of the Hague porn unit. And I took the train from Amsterdam down to The Hague, pardon me. And I spent the day with Yola and with John. And I couldn't move for 2 or 3 days. I'm also trained as a photographer. I look at people's eyes. And they showed me images that are horrifying of very, very young children. Now think back in 2000. You have to put this in the context of history and the context of the internet. Because I'm going to bring this forward to you of why everybody in this room needs to be concerned. In 2000, we didn't have Facebook. We didn't have an iPhone. We didn't have social media. We didn't have TikTok. We did not have the cesspool that we have today. We didn't have kids. The average age in the US is 8 years of age of children looking at porn. And there was a report that just came out of the UK that now children as young as 6 years of age are not looking for porn, but because they're on the internet, they're finding porn. 25 years ago, most of the porn that was on the internet at that point in time was what we would call erotica. It was not bestiality. It was not having sex with a dead body. It was not mutilation. It was not urinating. 25 years later, that is what a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old sees, because those numbers of 75% erotica, 25% is really bad stuff, is what a child sees on the internet, if they come across it. Kids can play a game on the internet, and then predators on the internet will try to make the kids feel as if they are playing the game with a peer, and then they take them to these porn sites. Now, the value of my work was recognizing the importance of the internet 25 years ago. And that was because when I was hanging out with traffickers in these red light districts, I would ask them, having been trained as a criminal investigator, how do you do this? And they were showing me that they were using the internet. And the Hague Porn Unit, this is what's fascinating, and I write about this in Shattered Innocence. They explained to me at the Hague Porn Unit that the internet was the Wild West. They actually had predators that were going on the internet, exchanging pictures, having these chat rooms, having these dark webs. There was a case in 1998 called Operation Cathedral here in the United States that started in California. And there was an 8-year-old girl who spent the night at her girlfriend's house, who was also 8. The father, who was a pervert, woke up that little 8-year-old girl, and he raped her. This is the little girl's guest. And a live audience of perverts instructed him what to do. That was in 1998. But as a result of that investigation that led to over 100 prosecutions in maybe 30 plus countries, the cops realized that this, in fact, was so important. And that is why we now have the ICE Cybercrime Lab here in the United States. The former New York Police Commissioner, Ray Kelly, set it up during the Clinton administration in the late 1990s. So when people criticize ICE today, I'm sitting back saying, wait a second, there's a whole other portion to ICE that we really want to have financed, engaged, supported, and basically on the run against the bad guys. That is how I got introduced to this issue 25 years ago. And as a result of that, because I heard rumors about the Catholic Church in Europe, and I was raised as a Catholic. I went to Sacred Heart boarding school. I went to Georgetown University, so I'm Jesuit educated. I had parents who were daily communicants. I had grandparents who were daily communicants and great-grandparents that were as well. I decided to take a look at the Catholic Church and take a look at my heritage. Because as an institution, I thought, well, maybe this is institutional trafficking. And I was blessed being born in Boston. Boston's where it really broke in 2002. And I had done some reporting on the historical secret archives in the Catholic Church. And my late father asked me in January of 2002 if I would meet with the prosecutors in Boston because they were trying to negotiate with Cardinal Law. Now, for all of you Chicagoans, you know about your late cardinal here. You know about the cover-up in Chicago. It happened not just in Chicago, it happened in Iowa, it happened in Wisconsin, it happened across the country and across the world. And what was fascinating to me is that the prosecutors I met with had no idea about the historical secret archives. And they, in fact, made a decision, because I told them, you have nothing to lose. Use a search warrant, go in there, seize the documents. It may be prohibited because of the statute of limitations, but it will give you the roadmap to figure out how they did this, orchestrated it, and covered it up. And they did. It sat the grand jury in spring of 2002 in Boston, and the rest is history for anybody who's Catholic in this event. It's horrifying. But in the book, the second book, and Jim, let me give it to me so I can hold it up. Jim was kind enough to buy it beforehand. But this is a book for anybody. How many Catholics are in this room? Okay. So this is the book, In the Name of God, Who Knew What When. That was the second book of this trilogy, and what I did for this is I went back to the beginning of that investigation in 2002, just like I did for Shattered Innocence, which is the first book of this trilogy, and basically bring Shattered Innocence, that investigation, forward to 2024. What did we learn? Well, we're losing the war against trafficking because of the internet, because people are not paying attention, because grandparents are not talking to their grandchildren and encouraging their own children about the difference of what it was like years ago without the internet. We have in the United States about 330, 340 million people. We have about 75 to 80 million of them born after 1990 and forward, which means we have a large percentage of people who have no idea what the world was like pre-internet. In the Catholic investigation, what I do is I go back to 2002 and I bring it fast forward and I incorporate into that as the subtitle of this book, In the Name of God, Who Knew What When? And prove that everybody in the Catholic Church not only knew about this horror, but people were, not just the predators who were complicit and engaged, but the system of how they used lawyers to cover up, who were basically hitmen on intimidating the victims, intimidating the parents, using the state legislation to create laws with statute of limitations, limiting it for victims to come forward, and also using canon law. If you were a person who worked in a non-religious at the diocese in Chicago, or you worked at the Vatican, under canon law, if you discussed any of the documents that you saw that passed your desk having to do with any of these sex abuse scandals in the church, you literally could be excommunicated under canon law for discussing any of these crimes. And the documents were there in the Catholic Church at that point in time, and they have been. They collected these documents for decades. For decades. The lawyers knew about it. The insurance companies knew about it. I had a relative who actually was a treasurer for one of the major dioceses here in the United States, and my uncle saw it in paperwork, but he couldn't put it together because he didn't have the documents that the insurance companies had, as Jim pointed out to me earlier. It is very important that people understand there are many people who actually are involved, and for whatever reason, and I can understand the economic pressures, but here's the one question that people have to ask. When you meet the face of God, He's going to ask the same question. What did you know and what did you do about it? And that's the only fear anybody should have about stepping forward. When I went through this process for the last 25 years, I came up with a model. to explain to people, because I had to explain to my colleagues at the networks in 2000 that not only is slavery alive, and what we all know that it's immoral, all right, slavery of any kind. But I had to convince my colleagues at the networks that in fact it was alive and well. It just had a different prism, a different portrait on the same canvas in a different time at the end of the 20th century and at the cusp of the 21st century. And I stayed with this story for the last 25 years because I kept on witnessing people not waking up. I kept on hearing stories and leading investigations. And people and parents and grandparents would call me about something, Christine, what is this? Or there's a case here and there. And I felt hopeless because I'm thinking, what is the message we have to tell everybody to really wake them up? As my friend says, most people don't wake up until something hits their front doorstep. Unfortunately, your front door has to be open and your lights have to be on for you to see what happens. But I can tell you, having interviewed thousands of victims, and it doesn't matter what country they're in. I've led investigations in 140 countries. It changes because of culture. It changes because of tribe. It changes because of the laws or maybe the lack of laws in those countries. But in 2019, or 2010-11, I got a phone call from a colleague that covers these stories at the time who since passed. And she said to me, Christine, I just attended a conference. It's not open to the press, but I'm going to tell you that they're going to try to decriminalize pedophilia in America. And I said, whoa, that's a little bit too far. I didn't think people would even have discussions about that. But she convinced me that it's something I should pay attention to. And in 2019, the same people who were involved in that group opened it up to therapists. So I called a friend of mine who was chair of a mental health association and said to her, Carolyn, sign us up, use our real names. And we went and we attended it. I contacted some intel friends of mine and I said to them, find me somebody in this country who has investigated and infiltrated NAMBLA, North American Men Love Boys Association. These are men that target little boys. These are pedophiles. And Bob Hamer, who's become a good friend, had retired from the FBI. He had investigated NAMBLA circa 2003, 4, 5. He thought maybe he'd run into a Catholic priest at that time. We didn't know each other, but he thought maybe he would, because that was at the time that the Catholic Church was erupting. And he didn't. And Bob coached me and Carolyn before we went into that conference. And what was astounding about that conference was there were more women in the room than there were men. And these are people that want to say, we're saying to the therapists, we want you to advocate for us to change the model to the German model so you don't report us to the police. And you can give us quote-unquote help, and then we will bring you clients. So that was the carrot that was held out to the therapist in the room. And there was a man who stood up, and I wrote about him in Shattered Innocence, who said that he had spent 10 years in jail and because of his relationship with his friend. So I was going to keep my mouth shut, and I couldn't. And I asked some questions, and then there was a break, and I'm sitting with the therapist at a table. And then he made a beeline for me, because I asked the question, what is it that you're looking for? And he came over to the table, and he said, media. And I thought, oh, maybe he's looked up my name. But I realized that he didn't. Because I said to him, so tell me about your friend. How did you meet your friend? Well, he was the son of one of the women he knew who was going through a bad divorce, and he befriended the friend. And I said, so tell me, how young was the friend? Because I'm thinking in my mind, he didn't buy an ice cream cone for spending 10 years in jail. And he said 8. And one of the therapists at the table literally got up from the table. She got triggered and she left. But that experience was a wealth of information to me, which brings me to my third book, which is called Urban Legends. Because Urban Legends is about what everybody in this room experienced during COVID and what erupted during COVID, but had been in the works prior to COVID, which is the trans situation that is erupting here in the States, targeting children. There is such a thing in the model that I created reflecting upon this. You have sex trafficking, you have labor trafficking, you have internet trafficking, you have child soldiers, you have skin trafficking, which has to do with voodoo, and that's used, your body parts are used to make a contract with you. It happens in places like Nigeria. You also have organ trafficking. Organ trafficking, you actually have to have a doctor who extracts an organ, and then you have the black market, and then you have to have another real doctor implant it. If you don't have those two white coats of doctors, you're not going to have organ trafficking. So you need that expertise. So for all of you who believe in the medical divinity of the white coat, like a lot of people in the Catholic Church believe in the religious divinity of the collar, evil is among us. And there's no guardrails on evil, and that's my message to you. You need to shift your paradigm and realize that this is for real. Evil is among us. What happened with COVID, and this is going to shock some people, this was planned way before 2019. This is a business. Corruption's a business. Sex is a business. Organ trafficking is a business. Skin trafficking isn't as much of a business, but it's a tribal ritual that has business tentacles to it. Corruption needs to be investigated like a business, and medical trafficking does in fact exist. Anytime that you lie, you defraud, you force, you coerce for sex or labor or medical or internet or any of these elements, any of these 10 faces of human trafficking, and you make money, that is considered human trafficking. Human trafficking is just another name for slavery or the commodification of the human race. It's heavy stuff, but I was able to see, because of my life experiences for the last 25 years, of what COVID was all about. I called Bobby Kennedy in 2020 and I said, this is medical trafficking. He didn't even know what I was talking about. Most people didn't. Most people still don't, all right? But I knew I could see it because I was, very early in 2020, too many people announced, in fact, that this did not come from a lab, it came from a wet market. As somebody who's trained to see, and somebody who's got enough years on her that I've done this kind of investigations before, I thought, why in February of 2020 were people actually saying that they had concluded that this came from a wet market when there was no investigation? Nobody was closing down wet markets all over the world. 2 people called for an investigation. They were from Australia. Never happened. There were no wet markets. And for some journalists and investigators, we all knew that wet markets were time bombs because you just open markets. There's food all over the place, animals. You're mixing different types of animals from different habitats. You're going to have germs. You're going to have urine. They're cutting them up. You're going to have blood. I mean, this is not complicated if you understand how this works. But people weren't saying the right things. Fauci, Francis Collins, the people that have a vested interest financially in gain-of-function research. In fact, we're all out there as part of the cover-up. So the first half of Urban Legends, and the reason why I called it Urban Legends, is because I had contacted a very prominent former prosecutor in 2020 who's been representing the Epstein victims for years. And I said to him, okay, Jack, I'm going to take this on, and what evidence do I need? Because people need to be held accountable for this. I'm not a science reporter, I'm not a medical reporter, I'm a corruption reporter. And the best advice I got was to get to the COVID vax injured. And I tried my damnedest in 2020 to find clinical trial COVID vax injured, and I failed. And I put the word out to several congressmen and former members of Congress. And then I found victims, COVID vax injured, in January of 2021. And I interviewed them for 6 months, nonstop. They were all traumatized. Many of them were from the healthcare industry. They didn't want to come out publicly. They didn't want to go on camera because they didn't want to be called anti-vaxxers. But these people actually knew the language of how to explain to their doctors and their colleagues in the business what their health issues were. I never talked to anybody that didn't have multiple injuries that were vascular, neurological, and cardio. I talked to the women privately about what was the effect of the shots on their menstrual cycle. There was not one that told me that they didn't have an issue. I even had a woman who had been in menopause for 10 years, and she was the only one that really wanted to talk about it. And she did on camera, because she hadn't had her period for 10 years, and all of a sudden she got it heavier than she'd ever had when she was younger when she had it. And keep this in mind, between January of 2021 and June of 2021, everybody was denying these are rare. These people were not getting assisted by the people in their medical industries. They were not getting recognized by our government. It wasn't until April of 2021 that Johnson & Johnson came out about the cardio effects. They said it was on younger men and boys. And in fact, Pfizer had been doing an investigation post-rollout starting in January of 2021 about the cardio effect, but they didn't announce it until the month later after Johnson & Johnson did in May of 2021. And in June of 2021, one of Fauci's collaborators, when I asked him how it was going for the rollout, he said to me, we have to do better on the message, Christine, because we have to tell people that you have to get the shots because it stops transmission and it prevents you from getting COVID. And I said, and this is in the book, in COVID, in the religions book, I said, Dennis, try that on somebody else who's a lot younger and a lot more naive. And he snapped at me. He said, look at Christine. This is the truth. And then I said, well, tell me about the COVID vax injured. Oh, they're urban legends. I said, really? He said, Christine, look at. We have 3 million people who take the shots, and 325 of them have blood clots. We have treatment for blood clots. And I said, Dennis, again, try this on somebody else. I've been interviewing these people for 6 months. They're in the business. They know the language. This is like somebody who speaks Japanese can communicate with somebody who speaks Japanese, okay? They're not somebody who's naive. These are surgeons, doctors, nurses, dental hygienists. These are experts. And they're not getting help. Now, in terms of the calendar, it's very important because the art of an investigation, the longer the fraud goes on, the better people like me and the team of people that we put together can get to the model of the cover-up and the corruption. And that's the gift that we have from COVID. So that was in June. In July, I released a 4-minute, and I'll give it to Debbie and everybody for the website. It was a 4-minute video on the myths of COVID. And I released it in July in Atlanta at an American Conversations town hall. It went out, and one of my sources called me and said, Christine, this is powerful, but you need to know, and this is someone in the Biden White House, you need to know that the end goal is to have a mandated seasonal coronavirus vaccination. So the good news from all of this is that didn't happen. They were mandated according to OSHA, they were mandated at the federal level, they were mandated in healthcare, and it went across, and it was pocketed, and I laid this out in the book, pocketed by an increase of the number of people. They wanted everybody to get a shot. But the ultimate goal, and we won that battle. We won the battle on the vax hesitancy, because safe and effective we now know is not true. They wanted to tell you, everybody, it was safe and effective because they didn't want any space to have a vax hesitancy. Then when the breakout cases came for people who had the shots, who got COVID, that was around the end of July 2021, August, all of a sudden you had this slew of mandates. United Airlines, Scott Kirby here in Chicago, hammered people. He demanded that everybody who was American-based United Airlines employee get a shot, but not anybody who worked for United overseas. It's a classic business school casebook study on how he has screwed up, even though those people who are in court right now haven't won their cases. We have DOD around that same period. Austin came out and said, and it came from the White House, we know this happened. He said everybody in the military had to get them. Feds for Freedom fought their case, but they didn't win their case until January of 2022. People lost their jobs. People were fired. People were let go. That's what the conversations about the Secretary of War, Hegseth, right now, about bringing some of these veterans back. They knew that they were breaking the law. They knew that they'd have to be played out in the courts. A lot of people have been hurt. And the kicker is this was in motion for the manufacturers of vaccinations here in the United States since 1986. How many of you know that there was a piece of legislation signed during the Reagan era that gave U.S. pharmaceutical vaccination manufacturers immunity from any prosecution? Let me see your hands up. Okay. So and we've had several pieces of legislation, Emergency Use Act, that have been implemented. We have BARDA, that's supposed to finance early treatment. We have DARPA, which is the dark side. And I was blessed to meet in January of 2023 a retired colonel from the Air Force. He graduated from the Air Force Academy. His name is Jim Zitlow. And Jim Zitlow flew as a pilot for United. And Jim asked if I would interview some of the people that work for United like I had the COVID vax people, because eventually when Fauci's guy called them urban legends, I went back to these people and said, look, you're going to be gaslit forever unless you go on camera. And bless their hearts, they did, and we released it in August of 2021. But Jim's story was interesting because Jim was appointed by Secretary Gates, who succeeded Secretary Rumsfeld, to create the first U.S. military pandemic preparedness plan in 2007. It was implemented for avian flu in 2009, 2010. And as Jim knew about this plan, there was early treatments, no mandated masks, no mandated vaccinations, and there was quarantine only for those who were sick. So Jim asked himself, what happened between 2010, when he knew about that plan's implementation, and 2020? And because I was focused on the Frankenstein scientists who were denying that this came from the lab since February of 2020, I was able to get deep into the PREDICT project, the gain of function, and how they implemented and created the belly of the beast that ultimately was to be a seasonal mandated coronavirus vaccination for everybody. Because you see, there's a database. They've been in this business for a long period of time. There's a database that was online for all these scientists. These stupid fools created billions of dollars invested in this model, and they didn't have an intellectual property contract of who owned the database for all the coronaviruses that they have discovered. So think of the Batwoman in China. There's thousands of her in different countries, over 30 countries. And the PREDICT project was created under, thank you very much, Chicago, the Obama administration. It went on for 10 years. And in 2019, it was two 5-year periods of time of financing. And then in the fall of 2019, the database of that coronavirus, it's a bank, it's like a library, think of it like a library. They've gone out, they've figured it out, they've taken them to the petri dishes, into the laboratories, they've figured out which one of these coronaviruses is going to be transmissible to a human being. They put it in the bank, it's a sequence. It's not, they have refrigerators for some of this stuff, but it's basically a sequence. But in September of 2019, they took it down. That same month, in 2019, somebody got President Trump to sign an executive order. And it had to do with increasing the 45% of Americans who get the flu vaccination. And if you go and read that executive order, it has the same type of language, emerging pathogens. All the same language that we all heard about during the marketing to get the COVID shots for the gain of function. But it's pathogens. It's the one world health. Animals, plants, human beings. This was on site. And I have to tell you, as a journalist and having a lot of experience in this, it was extraordinary to piece this together, because a lot of people were focusing on the science. A lot of people were focusing on the efficacy. Rand Paul was focusing on the gain of function. Fauci is lying. I'm flipping out. The guy is now, he's retired from the U.S. government, and he's at my alma mater at Georgetown University. And I'll be damned, I want to have the guy fired, because what he and Francis Collins and the rest of these people have done to the human race, I want to make damn certain that it never happens in my lifetime. And the reason why I wrote these 3 books, and I asked you to ask people to read them, is because I want it for posterity, that people in future generations know how to uncover this, because evil doesn't stop in one generation. And then, because of the 2019 infiltration of the Minor Attracted Persons Conference that Carolyn and I attended, talking about decriminalization of pedophilia, I was able to connect the dots on the trans business that emerged during COVID of targeting children. And I said to myself, I've been blessed, traveled all over the world, but what type of country am I living in where it is normal for people to think about decriminalizing pedophilia, and where it is normal and a business to mutilate children, and it is normal to basically say, keep secrets from the parents, because that's what sex predators do. They rape the child and they tell them it's our secret. That's one of the criminal tools of the trade, to keep it under the table. So we have school administrators, we have politicians pushing this trans policy, and what we have in motion is predatory politics. So for anybody who has grandchildren, you need to have serious conversations with your children. For anybody who has children, you need to flip your lights on to neon lights, and you need to pray to God that this type of evil never walks through your door again. And people need to get rid of petty politics. And I know this from both Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. On the local level, sometimes you have people acting like crazy people because of turf wars, when in fact you need to coalesce and get behind people and realize you are now in a war zone. The devil is alive and well, and we've never seen anything like this. And for anybody who's running for office, sir, you're running for what?
Congressional 11th in Illinois.
Okay, you need to up your game. Seriously, this is serious stuff. And if you can communicate it to people so they understand, nobody wants to go through COVID again. Okay? But if you don't want to ever go through COVID again because the business hasn't stopped, you need to wake up. You can't be complacent about this at all. You can't have your lights down and not realize that the operation at the border, in fact, was a trafficking operation. You can't have your lights off and not realize that when those kids came over, unaccompanied kids, the first stop before they were handed over to Catholic Charities, before they were handed over to Lutheran Charities, or before they were handed over to 100 Main Street in Chicago, the first stop, when they got to those distribution centers, for lack of a better word, first stop was medical. They gave them shots. But it's not all about the Bill Gateses. Skoll Foundation is involved. Agriculture's involved. Mining's involved. So it's not all pharma. BlackRock involved. Vanguard's involved. Equity partners are involved. This is a business. And the only way to win this war, and I'm convinced about this, the only way to win this war is to name and shame these people. Because that's what we did in the Catholic Church. Bishop Accountability is a website. And as the Catholic Church was imploding, these people at Bishop Accountability would go diocese by diocese, country by country, name the perverts, get the cases. They would name the cover-up people, the cardinals, the bishops, the whole gamut. The whole gamut. Jack Leslie, who went to Georgetown with me, was chairman of Weber Shandler. Simultaneously, he had the contract for Pfizer, Moderna, and CDC during COVID. That's not a coincidence that he's now at the Georgetown University Global Health Institute working with Fauci. The brakes have been put on this, but in fact, it hasn't stopped. They haven't shut it down. There are, in fact, more labs. There's 4 grades in these labs where they do this nonsense. This is what I call Frankenstein science. You've got the Wuhan's, that's supposed to be lab 4 that has maybe lab 1 or lab 2 in terms of safety. And the United States actually owns 25% of the global market of gain of functions having to do with lab 4s in the world. Now think about that. We have them in urban areas. That means Boston could be turned into Wuhan. That means Chicago could be turned into Illinois. I think it's the Chicago campus. Francis Boyle, who recently died, who we've been talking about bioweapons for decades, died this past year. They have one here at the University of Illinois. I think it's maybe it's Champaign.
Yeah.
I think it's Champaign. So we have it in urban areas, and people don't know the risk involved in these type of things. We have people that will ship the bats and the rodents, whatever they test these coronaviruses on, internationally. We don't have any regulations. So if you're somebody who doesn't think that, if you think, well, we got a handle on nuclear war because at least we have a treaty and regulations, we have none. And people on the record in the book Urban have admitted to me we don't have any. I was asked if I could get the guy who called the COVID vax victims urban legends on camera.
And it was Bobby Kennedy asked me when you and I were speakers at a dinner in May 2022. And then I went back and I thought, well, this dentist will never talk to me again, but he did. And for 90 minutes. Gave me the business model. And then I cross-referenced it because I kept on talking to people. But that's how arrogant they are. They will talk about it and thinking that everybody is stupid. They're banking on the public's stupidity. They're banking on the apathy. They're banking on the confusion. And people were harmed because of the volume of confusion because it came so fast to everybody in 2020 and 2021. Everybody has a story from a personal view. Everybody has. Doesn't matter what country I'm talking to people in. Everybody has a story. They lost friends, they lost families, they lost relationships, holidays sucked, okay? They couldn't get together. They were afraid of losing their jobs. They lost their jobs. They took the shots. They got harmed. They got gaslit by their doctors. I've interviewed people who actually were institutionalized. I talked to people who were back injured who, in fact, the doctor said maybe you need to be on some SSRIs. I had a woman, and this is the irony, not the irony, the part of this which is really sick, is that in this Urban Legends book, there's 4 people I asked to contribute to this book. Angelique DeSalle is one of them. She's one of the first people I talked to. She set up the first social group on the internet for COVID vaccine with a couple other people. When I met her, she had already given blood to NIH in January of 2021. It's January 2021. She had 1 shot of Pfizer. Christmas 2022, she had a lot of tremors in her body, but over the Christmas holidays, her eyesight was okay, but her eyeballs were shaking. So it doesn't mean that you can have something and it doesn't evolve into something else. It can. Jim Zitlow, who I mentioned, who had the plan, I gave him a byline in this book as well because people need to see it. Jeff Clayhorn, I was trying to understand the whole trans phenomenon. How did we get here? Jeff is a lawyer by trade. He was in the military. He's in his 60s. He's gay, and he explained to me the LGB versus the TQ pedophile groups, and there's an internal war going on. And when I was introduced to Jeff a couple of years ago, you know, I went back, I did some more research, and I said, Jeff, you need to write your own story because I don't, you know, I'm straight. What do I know? I wasn't out there fighting for same-sex marriage. I wasn't fighting for equal rights for anybody who was gay. I said, you need to write this story. So he's written a large portion of that part of the trans chapter. And then I went to, and I was introduced to Dr. Sheila Fury, who is, she's a psychiatrist, she's a child psychologist. She actually testifies as a human trafficking expert in cases, in child abuse cases. And she did the history. We all know that people refer to sometimes Johns Hopkins being the first trans surgical clinic here in the United States, going back to the 1960s. It was created by Dr. John Money. He was a sex fiend. He had a whole case that he said was a success of a little boy who had been, his penis had been burned during circumcision, and he was raised as a girl. And those 2 Reamer brothers, in fact, died. One committed suicide, and the other died, I think, from an overdose. And we went back to that. Dr. Paul McHugh, God bless him, he's in his 90s today, shut down that clinic in 1979. So we have to ask ourselves, as Americans, how in God's name do we go from shutting this down in 1979, possibly having 1 or 2 hospitals or clinics performing these operations, and in 2007, all of a sudden we have, depending upon whose numbers you believe, either 300 or 400 here in the United States. And your governor, his cousin, James, who's now Jennifer, is out there on websites, and I put it in the urban book, on websites through Tawani Foundation that he funds, and through Tawani Enterprises he funds. Jennifer James says on the website he praises Dr. John Money. This is a business, okay? And that's what people have to understand. You have to take a look at this as a business. How many entrepreneurs are in the room? How many lawyers are in the room? How many parents are in the room? Okay, grandparents. All right. When you take a look at this, remember this and remember it well. The opposite of evil is live. The opposite of slavery is freedom. The opposite of censorship is speaking out. Anybody who oppresses, anybody who contains anybody's voice to speak out to evil is not on your side of life, and certainly not on the side of God. Thank you. And I'm going to take any question, and there's no question that's naive, and there's no question that's stupid. Seriously, because I don't expect people to know everything that I know, but ask any question you want. We've got a microphone here.
Hello.
Thank you for your kind remarks.
Epstein papers. What is this is such a huge controversy. Of course, when Trump got in, he went out for the stuff. Then they're not getting released, then there's not released or released. It sounds like you might know something about this.
I do. I've been looking at the Epstein case for a couple decades. So there's a lot of politics involved. And when I've been asked about the Epstein case in the past, it's like before Maxwell's case, I always said that people would ask me, is there a list? And I said, well, the only thing I can tell you is I often wonder, but actually this was after Maxwell was convicted and sentenced. It's interesting to me that she's the only person that's been convicted, okay? There are, the papers themselves, for those of us that have looked at the documents as they have been unsealed for years, I can tell you that there were orgies, that women did participate in them, younger underage girls did participate in them. I know that Ghislaine Maxwell has been accused. There's some controversy now because people say, well, Virginia was a trafficker as well. That's true. A lot of these women that were around Epstein and Maxwell's orbit, in fact, did procure girls. Virginia Giuffre did it. And there was also Courtney's last name? Courtney Wild was one of the victims from West Palm Beach. She has admitted that she probably took 70 girls to Epstein's house in Palm Beach. So you have victims, then you have procurers, then you have people who were victims who were used. Just like in a forget Epstein case, out on the street for sex trafficking, they have something called the bottom bitch. The bottom bitch starts off as a victim. Then the bottom bitch teaches the other victims what to charge, what to do, drives them across state lines, and sometimes they deny that they should be on sex registries. So there's massive manipulation with that. But you had a specific question you would have brought about.
It seems to be dividing even the Republican Party as far as.
It's about the children. That's all you need to know. It's about the children. Okay? Anybody who thinks that this is normal human behavior to rape a kid is commodifying a kid. Epstein wasn't a good guy. Okay? And all the people that knew, they kept their mouths shut for whatever reason. You have people you have Bill Burns, I'm going to forget all Bill's titles. He was head of the CIA under Biden. Before that, he was Deputy Secretary of State from 2014 to, let's say, 2018, 16, I guess we were in 2011 to 2016, something like that, when Hillary was Secretary of State. And then later, John Kerry. Bill Burns met with him. Catherine Rula, who was in Obama's legal office at the White House, she met with him. There's emails just in the last 24 hours that they've released publicly that I've known about for years. They're out there. So it's not, it's, there's a lot of people that knew it, and then they'll say, well, we didn't know who he was. Well, how did you not know who he was when Cheryl Mills, who was at the Clinton General Counsel's office, was part of Clinton's impeachment team, was chief of staff to Hillary Clinton. Cheryl Mills was in his Black Book 2004 crime. And she was, and somehow Bill Burns was at the State Department when Cheryl Mills was chief of staff to Hillary Clinton, but nobody had a conversation about that. And Bill Burns met with, it's reported that he met with Epstein according to calendars in 2014. And then you have to ask the question, what happened in 2014? Ukraine. And I put this in one of the books. Jeffrey Epstein was invested, and he was friends with one of these guys from gain of function business.
Oh, shit.
I put it in the book, and he was acknowledged. You're saying, oh, holy shit, you don't believe me? You don't believe me? I mentioned the Epstein gain of function, and you said, holy shit.
Yeah, would surprise me.
Okay. His name was Nathan Wolf. Nathan Wolf was the owner and creator of MetaBio, which is in Ukraine. Nathan Wolf was in West Africa when Ebola broke out in 2014. So, I mean, there's more to the story than just the sex side of Epstein, but it's the relationships.
I didn't believe that, I wasn't aware of the Epstein involvement, but my question a couple of times in the course of the discussion is, aren't there international scientific constructs that would prevent germ warfare? Because this looks to me, COVID looks to me like germ warfare.
Bioweapons, yeah, there was in 19, I think it's 19, I'm going to get the dates off, 68, 69. Nixon outlawed bioweapons, okay? And then there was a treaty that was signed in the 70s, all right? There was a depopulation, I don't know whether, I wasn't an adult in 1968, thank God I wouldn't be standing here, but I will tell you this, that Nixon was asked, I just know this as a political journalist, Nixon was asked about an existential threat to the world during the 1968 presidential campaign, and he said overpopulation. Okay? Kissinger did a whole report that was under seal for about 10 years about overpopulation. Now, in the course of interviewing some of these gain of function people, scientists who are involved in this Frankenstein science, okay, that's the belly of the beast research for coronavirus vaccinations. There were a couple of people that mentioned to me and compared the population of 100 years ago during 1918, because it was nearly 2 billion at that point in time, and we have over 8 billion today. And the person, one of the people who mentioned it to me, is the same person who called the COVID vax injured urban legends. He's a big portion of the part of the book of urban legends dealing with the COVID cover-up because his name was on documents. His name is Dennis Carroll. And he's a lovely man. He's very smart. He believes what he's doing is right. But the problem is, he was part of the cover-up.
I believe that in the 70s, there was a agreement among scientists that if you would create, that is, insert something genetically into another, a longer chain, that if you would create something like that, there were, among scientists, there was agreement that you could destroy it 3 ways by high or low pH or heat, or that there had to be 3 ways to destroy it. And my belief is apparently maybe this was done in China to get around international agreements of scientists.
No, it's called a cleavage insert. And the furring cleavage actually was created by a man named Ralph Barrick, who's at Fort Detrick here in the United States. And he actually shared some of that research with the Batwoman She in the Wuhan lab. He's fully aware, he's on the record, there's documents to prove this. He even said it in an interview with Congress since COVID, that he never intended, he never gave her the instructions, I don't know whether that's true or not, to how to do it, for the insert for the cleavage. But there were scientists who had come out early saying that this didn't originate in the lab, but they were very hesitant in private emails that we were able to get through FOIA cases where they actually believed it had to have happened in a lab, but they later came out in public and said no, it didn't, and they went along with the narrative of a wet market. Go ahead, I see your question.
Is there a connection, I see there's a connection perhaps between Epstein and Diddy and all that's going on also?
I don't know that.
Okay.
I don't know that. I mean, the only thing I can tell you is that, Epstein used to go out to the Marmont Hotel out in Beverly Hills. I have no evidence whatsoever that he's been at any of Diddy's parties. I sincerely doubt it. But I don't know anything about that.
Yeah. And back to what you were saying, perspective on how the news media interprets what's going on. So we've been hearing that ICE has been going into the different neighborhoods and getting people, and why is it that they're taking out children? They get out of the houses that they're going to and arresting people. I had heard another perspective that this is what they're sharing, but what the reality was supposed to be is, why are these children naked, and were these children victims of molestation and so forth, and perhaps they don't want to share information like that.
Well, what we do, there's a number of whistleblowers. One of the books I'm going to write about in the future is going to be about the trafficking operations, the immigration, and also the unaccompanied children we've heard about very much so. People have to go back to, again, the Obama administration. There was an influx of border operations, 2013, 2014, here in the United States. It didn't just happen under Biden. It was happening under Obama. Trump came in and went down some, it didn't close down. Biden comes in, it's off the charts, it's above Obama's numbers and stuff like that, and then everybody got concerned. So there's different numbers about the unaccompanied children. There are whistleblowers who have come out, who have testified. I know that there are databases that had to be consolidated to locate the children. Some of them were handed over to charities, Catholic and Lutheran, to name some, and some of them were given to people across the United States, and they were turned over to some cartel gang members. So the question is, and I've spoken to law enforcement, they have asked me, do I have anything about organ trafficking from those trafficking border operations here in the United States? I said no, but we do have evidence of it happening in Mexico. But, you know, here's the deal. For sex trafficking today, I don't know really of a case where you just have trafficking on the street, on the ground, without having pictures taken and putting them online.
Something entirely different. I always have said to people, if you see something, say something, and stand up, especially for the children, because they're the ones that are going to suffer with what's going on. A lot of us here in the room have also gone to a lot of school board meetings and the library when we're seeing that these various programs are going on, and it's amazing that these people come out of the woodwork and give us such a hard time and are very, very disruptive. But I say let's continue to do that. Now, in the event that we observe something that is out of the ordinary, are there any newscasters in the Chicago area we could rely on to give the information to?
Give it to me and I'll figure out where it should go because it depends on the locale, it depends on the story, and it depends on the jurisdiction. Okay, I mean, from the law enforcement, and then also, because there's so much politics behind it, and you guys know this from school boards, okay? We have pornographic cartoons books for kids. Now, what I have been told is back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, I don't know how late it went, but in Playboy magazine that used to be shipped, you know, with a paper wrap around it, Hefner used to have child porn cartoons in Playboy. Now, those cartoons, and they had captions on them. Now we have them in schools, in libraries for kids. And we have conversations with kids about sex. I don't know about anybody else, but my mother sat me down and it was a one-on-one conversation, and it was not, it didn't have anything to do with a teacher, a nun, my brothers. You know, it was Mummy and Christine, all right? And that's the way it worked in my household with my father and my brothers, okay? And so I just, you know, all this talking about sex with kids is nihilistic. I mean, there's no guardrails. Anybody can talk to your kid about sex. That we used to call that grooming, okay? And that's a slippery slope, and that's what predators do. And one of the tools of the trade, and nobody wants to talk about this at a school board because everybody acts on the school board acts as if they don't know anything. They should have cops from sex units testify before school boards, because any cop who's ever done an investigation, and I've trained cops, and cops have brought me in on the inside, you know, 25 years ago, so they train me, I train other people because I'm crazy enough to go to the street and dress up as a hooker and hang out with transvestites to get the story. But here's the deal. They're acting like predators on the school board. The cops would tell them, one of the tools of the trade of seducing and grooming a child is to show them pornography. So we have created a library now where they can actually show a book to a 10-year-old that the kid's familiar with, that they think is normal because it's in their school, and Tommy and Jamie and Susie and everybody's whispering about it, and they don't think it's abnormal. It's abnormal human behavior. This is not how you treat kids. It's grooming. And so when you have a superintendent, the union, the LGBTIQ plus, whoever this person is, that's part of the club, that's an adult that's at the school, who's pushing this stuff and thinking it's normal. It's not normal for that person at the school to tell the children, we're going to keep your secret from your mom and dad. No. No, once you break down that communication, you don't talk to children about sex trafficking. What you talk to them about, and I've spoken to 5th and 6th graders, what you talk to them about is their experience on the internet that usually is shocking to the teachers in the back of the wall who have kept their mouths shut during my lectures, or parents with the kids on the ground and me in a chair talking to kids and watching the exchange of the kids actually absolutely revealing how they in fact have been threatened on the internet. And the conversation with the children is letting them talk about their fears and being threatened, and then remind them that they can always go to their mommy and daddy They can always go to their school principal. I say that loosely these days, all right? But they can go to their mommy and daddy if they feel uncomfortable about something because their mom and dad were kids, and when kids break rules, and you're not going to get slammed, okay? Your parents are going to love you unconditionally, and they are there to protect you. That's the job of mommy and daddies and grandparents. And that's what people need to tell their kids today and their grandchildren. Keep the line of communication open because we have all messed up when we were kids. I broke probably every rule in the house. And just because I was the youngest and the only girl, I got away with it. My oldest brother used to break the rules and he'd get hammered, and then my other brothers, my other brother would learn from his lessons. But it's just, every kid's gonna do something crazy. But it's always keeping the door open and guarding the children today, because here's something that has happened in the last 25 years. We didn't have the iPhones about, 2005, 6? And basically, it went into the back pocket of the kid. We produced a commercial in Europe, it was animated, and in the hand slipped the iPhone into the back pocket of the kid, but we morphed it in animation as a hand gripping the bum of the child, because that's what happened in society, and we could see that coming at that point in time. But now what happens in households is Johnny spends the night at Billy's. Billy's got an older brother, Stevie. Stevie goes online with the scene watching porn, teaches Billy and his little brother. Billy goes home, gets curious about it. And these are true cases that have happened and evolved as such. Billy goes home. He looks at mom and dad's computer, doesn't know the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor, downloads porn, then goes down the slippery slope, and then there's a knock on the door because the kid downloaded child porn. And in many instances, that little boy who's 13 can be pulled out of the house, depending upon the jurisdiction, spend a year in some juvenile home institution, and then the cops find out that he's already acted out on his kid's sister. So the parents are dealing with a child who's gotten caught up in this because they weren't paying attention, and a daughter who's victimized by it. And I actually have created retreats where I've actually had those type of situations, and a family show up at these retreats. So it's so sad. And it ruins everybody in the family. And that's why when these teachers and these school board members get up there, my heart breaks for these parents. Because even though they're speaking out, I tell people, get the cops to show up. Because the cops work these cases from the sex units. They know about grooming. They know about showing the child pornography. They know about showing the kid videos. And basically, grooming is part of normalizing this so the child walks in and they think this is okay. But if you talk to those children who have gone through this, they don't know that there's something wrong with this. And kids know that there's something wrong with this. Now, we're out of our minds as adults in this country. Seriously, we are so broken morally. It's embarrassing to be an American where people think this is normal. This is predatory behavior by politicians, school superintendents, these freaks that are financing trans business for mutilation, the hospitals, the nurses, the surgeons, the clinics, the equity partners who invested in this, the hospital administrators who are going along with it. It's wrong. It's wrong. I mean, is there anybody in this room that thinks this is right? Anybody thinks this is normal? And where are the people at the pulpits? Where are the ministers? Where are the rabbis? Where are the Catholic priests? Well, we know where they are, but I mean, we need to have people, we need more Bonhoeffers in the room speaking out and basically getting through to people and letting them know that silence is complicity. And when it comes to kids, God is not going to forgive you. It's that simple. I wish I could tell a joke right now because you all look so miserable. Yeah, Gretchen.
You went through the direction that I was going as far as keeping lines of communication open with kids and talking. And my husband and I are very blessed to have great relationships with our kids. We are not dumb enough to think that something can't happen to them, even with that open line of communication. Oh, we get choked up. What, because you're an excellent interviewer, what are some practical things that we can ask our kids, and I mean, even grandparents? I want my parents to talk to my kids. What are things, because I get in panic mode, and I'm like, did I touch you? What if something said? But, I kind of get in that panic mode. What are some calm questions and dialogue that we can open up?
I'll come back to Chicago. You put together a group of parents and grandparents with their kids, and you will all sit in the room in the back, and you're not going to open your mouths, and I'll have the conversations with the kids so you realize how much you don't know. Okay? I've done this before. And it doesn't have to be, a large group. It can be 3 or 4 little groups. But it's important for people. I was in Australia in 2016, and my dear friend Mark Davis had booked me. We met in Dubai. I talked about human trafficking. He said, I'm bringing you to Australia. So he had me all over the country, and then he booked me into a school. And his friend Christine was the principal of the school. And God bless her, she's walking me through, I'm meeting with 5th and 6th graders. And my rule was, you're in the back. You can bring all the teachers in, but you're in the back. And the kids were sitting there, and I'm sitting in a chair, and they're on the floor. And the kids opened up. And Christine, before we did that, had basically told me that they had all the whistles and blues and security, and the kids couldn't break through the internet. And I thought, oh, God bless her. She's going to have a heart attack when I get to these kids. But they learned, okay? They learned. And some of the kids cried because they had been threatened online. These are 5th and 6th grade kids, and they had been threatened, all right? So apparently, and I was telling them, no, you can trust Miss Christine, et cetera. Well, apparently a mother showed up the next day and walked in and said to the principal, I don't know who Miss America is, but I love her because little boy went home that night and told his mom, okay? Because I emphasized, Miss Christine, the principal loves you, these teachers love you, you can always tell them everything, it doesn't matter, you can always go to your mommy and daddy. I was a kid, I broke every rule. I mean, it's not about sex. It's not always about touching. It's letting them know that if they feel uncomfortable, just like bullying, if they feel uncomfortable, if they get in too deep. I mean, 15 years ago, because of the iPhone, it was only when the iPhone came on and you had cameras, the kids are taking pictures of themselves. And all of a sudden, they're being extorted. And it's not just, send me a picture of your boob. They want action shots. They want video. And then it's if you don't send me some money. If you don't send me more pictures, I'm going to send them to everybody that you're connected to on your Facebook page. I mean, when did we think that blackmail and extortion was okay for babies? That's why we have to be open with these kids. But I will. Gretchen, I'll come back. I'll come back. And you put together a group with the kids, I'll come back and talk to them. And the parents, because it's important for parents and grandparents to learn their world. We know what our world is. We know what our life experiences are. We know the world before the internet. These kids have nothing but the internet. Anybody else?
I just would like to ask one question in reference to, I'm a grandma, and you're trying to encourage your kids about the internet, about phones. Is there anything other than saying, don't do it? And my kids came to listen to you when you were here last. And my grandson is 2, and he sits with the iPad. And it crushes me.
Why is a 2-year-old sitting with an iPad?
I am not a parent, and I have argued and argued.
So how old is your daughter?
32.
Okay, so she grew up in the internet world. Okay, so if you're born in 1990, going forward, that you're about 85 million people. You don't really know the world, because by the time the internet onslaught happened, was the late 90s, 2000, and then it was in the schools. I mean, we don't have books in schools today. Everything's online. We had homework. You know, Wikipedia was something that was unacceptable in 2005 on college campuses, and then it became acceptable. Then all of a sudden, everything's online. But I think it's interesting. We have things that are online for education, but we have child porn cartoon books in libraries. How does that work? How does that work? So you have to ask the parents, what's the value of having a 2-year-old online? Because here's another thing that we don't know. We didn't have brain scans 25 years ago for people looking at pornography, and they started about 15 years ago. And we know that in the front of your brain where your discretion develops, we know that if you look at pornography, and this is something, let's go back even before that. Back in the I think it was 1980s, Tipper Gore was talking about video games, the impact on video games, because she saw it with their son Albert III, whatever his kid's name is, and the behavior because of looking at video games. That's before the internet as we knew. It was just video games, you know, on the TV set. So 15 years ago is when they started doing the brain scans, and they saw that if you look at pornography, that it changed, the brain waves change in this frontier, the brain, where discernment develops. What we don't know is the long-term effects of looking at this. Now, think about this. If you're 6 or 7 years of age and you're looking at pornography, if violence has an impact on a child's brain on a video game, sex out of context, let's be real about this, is going to look like violence to a 6-year-old. Because the stuff they're seeing today is not erotic. So we don't have long-term studies of the impact of this generation, but I'll just swing it out here. I believe that, in fact, because I can see the behavioral changes in children in a lot of these cases. We saw this with the iPhone, internet, high school, teenage, college boys looking at porn, and it's flipped from erotica to some bestiality. We know from college girls in the last 10 years, there's an expectation of porn sex among dating relationships. So if you think that erotica is dead, that means the kids don't know anything about romance. And if the boys are looking at stuff that's on the very, very dark side of it, and there's an expectation of that, and the girls feel uncomfortable about it, that's why the girls went to college counselors. And that's all happened in the last 15 years. So it's a serious cultural phenomenon that's going on. But you have to have conversations about what's the value of having a 2-year-old on an iPad.
I understand, but I just thought, bring that forward, because a lot of us are grandparents,
Yeah.
and we're dealing with that with our own children. So, thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you all.